Hey everybody, and welcome to my new series, which is Guitar Techniques 101. This is a series I've been thinking about doing for a while. I wanted to focus on more of a guitar lesson series, not so much focused on music theory or scales, notes, chords, and whatnot. I've done some videos like that in the past, but rather more about using the expressive techniques that we have on our guitar. Guitar is a very unique instrument in a lot of ways, and we have a lot of great, like I mentioned, expressive techniques that we can really use to color up the existing notes that we can play, right? So we may all know a pentatonic scale on our guitar, but we hear some players use a pentatonic scale, and it could just be the order of the notes and the placement of the notes over particular chords, but also in the way they express themselves using different techniques. Bends, slides, vibrato, tapping, you name it. There's all legato, hammer-ons, pull-offs. There's all sorts of techniques. So I wanted to do kind of a deep dive, multi-part series, kind of focusing and really helping folks to maybe think outside of the box and really learn these expressive techniques well to really raise our playing to a new level. So that's my goal with this, and I hope I do it in an enjoyable fashion that helps some folks out. So today we're gonna dive right in and talk about guitar bends, bending on the guitar. So first things first, what is a bend? Well, a lot of folks already know how to bend on the guitar. We grab a string, we basically push it up or pull it down, therefore tightening the string, much like we would with our tuning machine, and raising the pitch. It sounds simple enough, and I mean, in some ways it really is, but in my experience teaching and watching a lot of players, it is probably one of the most misused techniques. It can sound wonderful and expressive if it's used properly, but boy, can it sound bad if it is not. Okay, now you might say, well, what would happen that would make a guitar bend not sound good? And a lot of it really comes down to one issue is tuning, right? Not bending to the right note or to the right place. As I mentioned, a bend is actually changing the note from, the note we start on up to another note. So we can imagine that if we spend all of this time learning, let's say, a pentatonic scale, right, only to come to one note and bend to a note that's not in the scale. It could really affect how good our bends sound. Okay, so one thing that I like to do and where I want to start is I like to actually go to guitar tablature and show folks how guitar bends are written inside of tablature. Now, a lot of you folks may be very familiar with this, but I think it's a good place to start because it also gives us kind of a way to maybe visualize our bends and think of them as moving to a very particular place. And I think we really need to know before we do any bend where our ultimate destination is going to be for that bend. So if we look here, these are some Guitar Pro tabs showing some different styles of bends. We obviously have just this sort of curved line up with a little arrow on top. But something's very important about that. That's telling us we're going to grab a note, whatever note it says, and we're going to bend that. But now if you notice, there are little numbers or fractions on top of this. Everything from a quarter to a half to a full. Could have 3/4, I guess. You 1.5 and even 2, all right? So a lot of folks might ask what that means. Well, what that's talking about is steps on the guitar. So if we know anything about guitar playing, we know that a half step is the movement of 1 fret, right? So if I'm at the 8th fret here on the 2nd string, my G note, to move a half step would be to move it up to a G sharp at the 9th fret. A whole step would be moving it up to the 10th fret. 1.5 steps would be moving it up to the 11th fret, and 2 full steps would be moving it up 4 frets all the way to the 12th fret. Okay, so when we see something that says a half step bend going upwards, we simply would grab this, we would bend it until it sounds like the note 1 fret higher or a half step higher. So if we listen to this note, we can then come back to the 8th fret and bend it until we hear this note, turning the G into a G sharp. If it says a full step, we would want it to sound like the 10th fret. Okay, 1.5 steps. We're now getting into bigger bends, and then, you know, probably the biggest bend you're going to see 2 steps. All the way up. And we get into string breaking territory at that point, potentially. So those are the different meanings of those numbers that go with the bend. Now, on top of that, though, and we'll come back and talk about that in a couple minutes. On top of that, though, we also have different styles of bends, I guess we could call them. We have the bend in reverse, where we might bend up and then return the note to normal. Okay? We have the pre-bend, which is just, instead of a curved line going up, a straight line going up, meaning we bend it first. We have that, the pre-bend and release. So that's the bend that can give us the impression that the note is actually falling in pitch. Right, so that's a neat technique in and of itself. We could do a bend where we're pre-bent, and then we continue the bend upwards, or we could bend up, and then stop at one point and then continue the bend upwards, right? Now we also have something like the quarter step bend, which is going to kind of just be almost putting the note out of tune. So it would be kind of like this type of thing. Now I would probably not use it in that fashion. Just sounds like we're playing a tune. I might do a really quick bend and release with that. Right? Not really dwelling on the note, but using it more of as an expressive kind of inflection to the notes. Okay, so now, how do we practice this? Because we want our bends to be dead on, right? So one thing we can do is grab a note, and like I was just doing, listen to our target note or our destination note. So if we're at the 8th fret here on the 2nd string, let's say, listen to the 9th fret. Get that tone in your ear. And then move back and practice bending right up to it. And then go to the 10th fret. Try your full step bend. Might be good just to start with those two just to get a feel for it. And the more you do this, the more natural it's going to become that you can just sort of get to that bend in a very accurate fashion. Now, there's no such thing as absolute perfection here, and that's the beauty of the bend, is sort of in the human imperfection that goes along with it. We may be slightly flat, slightly sharp, but not in a way that's going to be offensive to the listener, but more just as an expressive way. Right? So it can be a very expressive way to play. So that is one really neat way to do it. Now it's so important to be able to practice that so that we can get our bends very accurate. So that if we are playing from a scale, we can actually know, here's the destination I want to be to, and I know it's not going to be an issue getting there, right? So that's a very important little thing to do. Now you might say, well, how am I actually doing the bend physically? A lot of times you'll notice I will try often to bend with my 3rd finger, just because that's a fairly strong finger. My pinky's not going to be my first choice, although I will show you a way that we can utilize it. First finger is going to be okay at times. But if you notice when I use my 3rd finger, what I usually do is at least use my middle finger kind of paired up with it. Sometimes even my 1st finger. And using this as a unit to almost be using my entire hand to actually facilitate the bend, right? So you might say, well, what's the proper finger position for it? If you notice, we're playing up on our fingertips. We almost have to take our finger, sort of not, I'm not one to play directly on my fingertip, but more of an angle, but then just sort of flatten it out so we're under the string while still keeping the pressure. I don't know if you can see that. Still keeping the pressure on the string itself, okay? And then I just get these fingers in behind it, not necessarily on their frets, but just in as a unit. If I try to bend with just this finger, I'm gonna run to strength very quickly, but if I have these two fingers in behind, or even one, I'm gonna be able to get that bend. I'm going to be able to get it much higher and it's going to be very effortless. So we get kind of under the string so we can roll the hand. If you notice, I have my thumb over top. Not necessary, but I just find getting that grip there. Now, if I am using my first finger, I may just have to dig in a little more because I don't have that strength. But if you notice, kind of grip the neck, right? And this is just the way I do it. Some other folks may have different ways, and there's no necessarily right or wrong way to do this. If it works for you, then that's wonderful. But this is the way that I find works for me. So if I had to use my pinky, again, if I have these fingers in behind it, I'm going to be able to get a lot of strength out of it. If I tried to do that bend with my pinky by itself, there's no way, there's no strength there. So if I'm doing a little pentatonic climb here, first finger, pinky, first finger, pinky, I bring all these fingers in behind it, roll it up, and it's just as easy to bend with my pinky doing that as it is if I was using my third finger. Okay, so that's kind of the way that I go about that. So I don't know if you can see from this side. Okay, so that's kind of the technique behind it. Now, what are some creative things we can do? So now we understand that, we have to have a target in mind or a destination to bend to note-wise. We understand, quarter steps, half steps, full steps, 2 steps, 1.5 step, however much we want to bend it, and thinking of it in terms of actually bending to a particular other fretted note. We have a little bit of the technique behind it, which you'll have to practice all these things to get your ear tuned into it and get your fingers feeling comfortable just bending. But is there anything expressive we can do with this? Well, there absolutely is. One thing a lot of folks don't talk about is the simple idea of how quickly do we want to get to our destination, right? I find a lot of folks, especially beginner players, will kind of play some notes and just kind of yank the note up really, really quickly trying to get there. And a lot of times they overshoot, as I just did, right? Because they're just yanking it up. That's fine. There's nothing wrong. That is one means of expression. We can also hold a note before we bend it. We can also take longer to get it to its destination. So the same lick, but performed very differently. It can be a very expressive way to use bends. So, you know, altering this speed of sort of our starting point to our target or our destination, changing it up to whatever we feel expresses what we're trying to get out of the guitar at that moment. So that's a really good thing to keep in mind. I notice a lot of things that people don't vary. And, you know, our playing is all about having enough tools that we're going to be able to constantly keep people interested in what we're playing. If all of our bends are kind of the same speed and to the same place, yeah, it's going to get boring for the listener. The listener may not even realize why they're bored, but they're bored, right? Because all they're ever hearing is we always just go. You know, every bend was just kind of like, I get the note, I bend it really fast to my destination, and I move on. There's no variety. Versus. So there I'm trying to really vary how quickly my bends get to their destinations. And that's probably one of my best tips for bends, is to really practice bending in different speeds. Slowly getting up to a note, quickly getting up to a note, and sort of everything in between. And then when we go to use our bends, we're going to have a much deeper pool of resources to keep them interesting, right? One other technique I really enjoy is going outside of a scale, let's say, and bending to a note that's in a scale. And you gotta be careful with this, because if we dwell too long on the note outside of the scale, it doesn't sound too good. But I'll give you an example. If I'm in a typical A minor pentatonic type of thing, what I could do is, let's take right here, 5th fret, and going to the 7th fret on the 4th string. So from a G to an A. Well, what I could do is I can play the A, kind of bounce back a fret to a note that isn't technically in the scale, which does make kind of a neat passing tone sometimes. But what we want to do is we want to play our G, A, go back to the 6th fret and just give our half step bend to get back to our note we were just on. So you can see I'm picking notes anywhere, and a lot of times if I find maybe the lick I did wasn't quite as interesting as I wanted, I can get back to that note, but in a much more expressive way. So one way we can practice this is by just playing our scale and doing, like, let's say our normal kind of 1-4, 1-3, 1-3, 1-3, 1-4, 1-4 pattern. But go 1-4, come back a fret, and do this little bend back to the note we were just at. So just the 1-4, back a fret bend. And you get some very expressive licks once you get kind of quick at that. So really kind of going outside of the scale for just an instant and bending back into the note. That's a real favorite of mine. So you could take a very simple lick now. Now there's another interesting one. Bend to a note we want to get to, hold it there, and then continue upwards. I think the first player that really turned me on to this type of stuff was listening to Jeff Beck on his Blow by Blow record with, you know, 'Cause We've Ended as Lovers, where he would do a lot of this and a lot of these really interesting bending techniques. And that really fascinated me. And I was, man, this is so much better in a lot of ways than just like somebody shredding, right? There's so much expression, and it almost kind of mimics more the inflections in a human voice. And maybe that's why it's so interesting. So that's another neat one that we can have. So you can see, very simple set of notes. Little blues scale action. All pentatonic blues scale type things. But all of a sudden we can make it very expressive. Now, this little bend and return, where we bend up and we come back, we can also, again, think of, you know, how quickly we go up and how quickly we come back. Right? Fast on the way up. Slow return. Maybe we do the opposite. We go up very slowly and we come down very quickly. Again, very expressive. Now with the quarter step bend, I really like with this because very quick bend and return, but not really going anywhere. Just a small little quarter step bend. We can practice that with our scales, right, on every note, so that anywhere we go, a lot of times with that, I'll let the note sort of be the note first. I won't just kind of, you know, all the way up, just kind of. There's some of those techniques kind of mixed together, right? So that's a very cool, interesting technique as well. We also have some double stop style bends. A double stop being where we're playing two notes at the same time. Where we could grab a note, let's say in the pentatonic scale, go here on the 8th fret. So instead of, you know, sliding from the 7th to the 9th fret to the 8th fret, a lot of country players with some hybrid picking. So bending a note up, holding it. Right, can be a very expressive way of doing it as well. And that leads into kind of a unison bend idea as well. And a unison bend is when we take two notes that start off as different, but they turn into the same thing. So very common examples, if we go between the 2nd and the 3rd strings, would be, you know, first finger, let's say on the 5th fret on the 2nd string on E, 3rd finger on the 3rd string on D on the 7th fret. And I would get my 2nd finger in behind that for strength. Now, I've got to make sure that these fingers don't touch the 2nd string. When I hit that, you know, that interval is very dissonant and clashes, but what we do is we slowly bring the bend up on the 3rd string so it matches the same note. We're turning the D into an E, but we cannot move the 1st finger at all to keep it just perfectly in tune. We can add some vibrato to that to give it a little bit of attitude. That same thing on the second and first strings has spread out one more fret though because of the tuning of the guitar. We can either play the notes together or at separate times, same with the double stops. So there's a lot of those techniques kind of rolled up into one, right? So a lot of fun and a lot of expression possible. So we really just have to kind of start thinking outside of the box and not thinking that there's no variables to a bend, right? There's not just variables in the amount we bend the note, but there's also variables in the speed we bend up, the speed we come back down, what other notes we add to it, right? The amount we bend, so we can do those quick little, quarter step bends, or now one thing I really like too that I mentioned before was this sort of pre-bend and then release to give the impression the note is falling. On a guitar without a tremolo bar, we have no way of bending the note downwards, but we could do this. A lot of times I'll do this, I'll be climbing up a lick, stop, bend, so silently bend up just so I can bring that note back down. Kind of like the bend in reverse, except we're not hearing it go up. Right? I started up, went further, then came down. That's a very expressive sound to it. Right? So a lot of little things that once we start combining these techniques, we realize there's a lot of possibilities. So the other thing about it is knowing our destination note, right, where we want to be. So if we take a pentatonic scale and think of it like this, if we take this sort of root position pattern, 1 4 1 3 1 3 1 3 1 4 1 4, move to sort of the next position where it's. This kind of tells us all of the scale tones we can bend to, right? So if I'm here at the 8th fret, I know that the next note is going to be at the 10th fret. So this would have to be, to stay within the key or the scale, a full step bend. For this one, I would have to do a 1.5 step bend. And this little exercise that I'm doing right now is a very good thing to do. Again, a 1.5 step bend. And by practicing it in that fashion, once we're into sort of soloing lick mode, if we've done that enough, it's going to be very natural to just... we won't be thinking as much. So we get up to the next string. just a full step bend. So those are all going to be full steps. Right? So it would be full step, 1.5, 1.5, full step, full step. And we could do that for all the pattern. Knowing I've got to get, that's the next scale tone. And that gives us that way of maybe moving across a string. That's another favorite of mine to do. You know, I start here, bend up to the next note in the scale, and then after I bring it back down, I slide up. So there's some of those, maybe over-exaggerated right now, but so there's some ideas. You know, there's probably a lot of other ones. We can get into ideas where we're tapping. Now with that, a lot of times I'm helping my tapped hand to kind of bend up with this hand, but there's all sorts of possibilities. But that was just some of the ideas I wanted to talk about, and hopefully that sparked some new ideas for you guys and that you'll feel kind of comfortable or more comfortable maybe practicing your bend. So what I would suggest is, you know, first get comfortable with just the technique of bending, the physical side of it, being able to maneuver that string properly, but then start getting the ear involved right away and pick your target notes, you know. And then practice getting to those in the best way possible. And then you can start incorporating some of the... You know, and sometimes you want that kind of out of tune, almost in a controlled manner, right? But so I hope some of those tips helped you guys, and I hope you found them useful. And I hope it really gets you sort of in the right direction to maybe start coming up with more interesting bends or adding to your repertoire that you already have. And for those who already do all this stuff, wonderful. I hope I was at least mildly interesting to listen to. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for more parts in this series to come, and hopefully I can give you some tips that'll help to kind of elevate your playing to places you maybe never thought of, or even if you just get one little thing out of it that you can add to your playing that makes it better, then I'm pretty happy to have been able to help in that way. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Please like the video, share it if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new videos out. And I will be back very soon with some more content. Thank you guys so much, and ciao for now.